Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I am Mark Kligman. I hold the Mickey Katz Endowed Chair at UCLA, and it's my honor to give you greetings as we open up this wonderful new series, The Interfaith Space of Music and Poetry. And it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce the organizer of this event, or one of the organizers, Dr. Merav Rosenfeld-Hadad. Dr. Rosenfeld-Hadad is a musicologist who specializes in all types of Arabic and Middle Eastern music, prevalent among Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities across and outside the Middle East. She focuses on the interaction of this music with issues of identity, nationalism, and Jewish-Christian-Muslim relations in their wider historical, religious, political, and cultural context. She has a very impressive resume and life experiences of bringing these issues to the fore in both her activities and her publications. One of her most recent publications is a wonderful book called Judaism and Islam, One God, One Music, published in 2019 with Brill. I know from personally working with Dr. Rosenfeld-Hadad how engaged she is not only with the materials, but with people and the various aspects that want to make all these interactions work. I so look forward to this series, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Merav Rosenfeld-Hadad for our first presentation today in this forum.
Thank you very much, Mark, for your kind words. And I'm, with great honor and pleasure, I am opening the first lecture of our series of International Interfaith Reading Group, Art in Interfaith Contexts. And I will start my talk let me just share the screen for a second. So my talk will be on the interfaith space of music and poetry, the case of the Babylonian Jews. One of the most ancient and valuable religio-cultural assets of the Judeo-Arabic culture in general, and of the Babylonian Jews in particular, is the paraliturgical song, which is called by the Babylonians Shbaḥoth, and known in Israel as piyutim. The paraliturgical song typically takes the form of a Hebrew religious poem expressing Jewish values and ethics, which is mixed with idiosyncratic Arabo-Islamic poetic features of form, style, and even content. This rich poem is frequently set to a melody of an already existing Arabic song, and it is sang at Jewish private and public religious events outside liturgical settings, such as Sabbath meals and circumcision and bar mitzvah celebrations. The texts of these songs are documented in many collections that have been published over the course of many centuries by Jewish communities in Arab Muslim countries, including the Babylonian community. The melodies, on the other hand, were always orally transmitted, tend to change from time to time, and were never documented in any kind of notation. Another interesting fact is that the practice of this ancient genre is not regulated by any halachic law, that is, Jewish religious law. After 1948, when most Jews left Arab lands, the paraliturgical tradition continued to be central in their religio-cultural life, wherever, whether in Israel or in any other Western country to which they immigrated. New songs were created and performed mostly in Israel by Arab Jewish artists and their Israeli-born offspring. Following drastic political and socio-cultural developments in the early 1980s in Israel, this genre became a symbol of the renewed identity of Israeli Jews originating in Arab Muslim countries. Recently, the paraliturgical song has gained a wider recognition, and its revival has extended to other sectors of Israeli society. Religious and non-religious artists began performing the old songs, creating new ones, and capturing young middle-class audiences originating in all parts of the Jewish diaspora, East and West. Both the artists and their audiences see these songs as a significant component in their spiritual journey into their Jewish tradition and identity. These songs are performed now not only on religious occasions, but also at typical gatherings, at special gatherings intended for the singing of these songs. In my talk today, I hope to show how, for many centuries in the Arabo-Islamic diaspora, the music and the text of the paraliturgical song created an interfaith space of coexistence between Judaism and Islam that, to some extent, still exists today. I will demonstrate how this coexistence is reflected in the poet's work across the long centuries within the Arabo-Islamic civilization and in the worshippers' celebrations at present. In addition, I will try to give you some idea about the extent to which this unique space of coexistence mirror the close cultural relationship that Middle Eastern Judaism in general and the Babylonian Jews in particular had and still have with the Arabo-Islamic culture. So when did this genre started? In my book, Judaism and Islam, One God, One Music, I explored the wide historical, religious, and cultural context of the genre and its people. My investigation was based mainly on the largest collections of the paraliturgical song edited and published by the Babylonian Jews. The first is the 1906 collection, which was edited and published by Ezra Dangur in Baghdad. And the second is the 1954 collection, which was edited and published by Saleh ben Yaakov Mansour in Jerusalem. By discovering the names of the poets whose work appear anonymously in this collection, I found that they cover 1,000 years of Hebrew religious poetry dating from the 10th century. They include poems that were written by the most prominent poets of the genre, who produced their work within the Arabo-Islamic civilization and under its influence. Altogether, these collections record 4 formative periods in the history of the texts of the genre. So we start with Abbasid Baghdad of the 10th century, Muslim Spain between the 11th and the 15th centuries, various places across the Ottoman Empire, including North Africa, between the 16th and the 18th centuries, and Baghdad again between the 18th and the 20th centuries. The first period is documented in Abbasid Baghdad of the 10th century through the work of Dunash ben Labrat. In 762, during the reign of the Khalifa al-Mansur, Baghdad became the capital of the Abbasid dynasty. The small community of Jews who had lived there from the 3rd century gradually expanded and became the largest Jewish urban community in the area known today as Iraq. By the 10th century, Jews were using Arabic for nearly all forms of writing, both secular and religious, excluding religious poetry. And Baghdad, the Islamic capital of the Abbasid dynasty, also became the spiritual capital of the Jewish people. It was the place where Rashi HaGola, the heads of the diaspora, lived. They were the highest authority on Jewish law, who led and guided most Jewish communities, both in the Middle East and in Europe. The rich and vibrant Baghdad attracts Dunash ben Lebrat, a poet, a linguist, and a musician who was a native of Fez. Dunash arrives in Baghdad to study at the feet of Saadia Gaon, who was the first spiritual and literary leader in Jewish history to open the doors of Jewish writing and thinking in general, and of poetry in particular, to Arabo-Islamic culture. Dunash absorbs much of Gaon's literary doctrine and ultimately creates his own unique poetic style. He enthusiastically adapts the structure and stylistic features of Arabic poetry, fully applies the quantitative meter, which makes the distinction between long and short syllables, and writes the first Hebrew religious qasida, which is a very central poetic form in Arabic culture, much earlier than Islam emerged. He also borrows the idea of using the Quran as a source of inspiration and vocabulary for Arabic poetry, and employs the Hebrew Bible for the same purpose. In 1960, Dunash moves to Cordoba and becomes a leading figure in establishing the foundation of the new Spanish school of Hebrew poetry. The only song written by Dunash that is included in the collections I have mentioned is the earliest of all the songs to be featured. In the comfortable and safe atmosphere of his time, he writes his song for the Sabbath, Deror Yikra Leben Im Bat, the Lord shall proclaim freedom for both son and daughter. Dunash expresses the merits of keeping the Sabbath and mentions with no fear two powerful and sworn enemies of the Jewish people, the empires of Edom and Babylon, and even asks for God's revenge upon them. Let's hear one of the known melodies adapted for this song by the Babylonian Jews, performed by the renowned cantor Moshe Chabusha. The second period is documented in Muslim Spain between the 11th and the 15th centuries through the work of Shlomo ibn Gabirol. The period during the 11th and the 12th centuries is regarded as the best Jews ever experienced under Islamic governance, as they enjoy a high degree of religious and civil autonomy. A free religious, political, and cultural atmosphere gave rise to a significant Jewish courtier class with a sense of identity which combined Jewish and Arabo-Islamic values and ideas. Social and intellectual collaboration were common and normal between Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Ibn Gabirol, the Jewish Spanish poet and philosopher, was born into this world of cultural and religious convergence. More than any other poet, he is responsible for the great change which occurred in Hebrew poetry under the influence of Arabo-Islamic culture and religion. Ibn Gabirol writes the first Hebrew religious muashah, another very central Arabic poetic genre, and in his time, the muashah was only secular, and he was criticized for that. Only later on, the Arabic muashah became also a religious genre. And he also writes the first Hebrew qit'ah, which is typical to the Sufi writing. And indeed, he employs concepts and ideas strongly inspired by Islamic mysticism, mainly Sufism, and the idea of zuhd, that is, the rejection of material comfort in order to pursue personal contemplation and meditation, all to get closer to God, of course. Eventually, Ibn Gabirol adapts the Sufi concept as a way of life. It seems that he lived in the same cultural and intellectual atmosphere as his predecessor, Dunash. For example, in his poem, which is a qit'ah, as you can see, it's a 5-line poem, Shefal Ruach, with lowly spirit. He describes a refined and sophisticated worshipper who presents before his God his concerns and dilemmas. This song portrays a Jewish religious piety combined with Islamic ideas, and thus represents a worshipper who could be, for that matter, Jewish or Muslim. Let's hear Chabusha's rendition for this song. The third period of the genre is documented in various places across the Ottoman Empire, including North Africa between the 16th and the 18th centuries. This period is represented through the work of Israel ben Moshe Najara. For both Muslims and Jews, the year 1492 symbolizes the dramatic change. For the Muslim, this year marks the fall of their last stronghold in Spain, in Granada. The Ottoman Empire became the next and to date the last of the great Islamic world states. In the same year, the Jews were expelled from Spain, a trauma that left its mark on Jewish life for many centuries. A number of places within the Ottoman Empire became the home of large and important Jewish communities, shaped by both the already existing Jewish population and the new exiles from Spain. The spiritual crisis of the post-exile experience led to a remarkable engagement in Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, which was accompanied by rituals of singing. In this new environment, the work of the rabbi, poet, and musician Israel ben Moshe Najara emerged. His new and unique poetic style reflects the influence of both the Turkish and Arabic cultures, as well as the strong bond with his predecessors, the poets of Muslim Spain. Najara is regarded as the most popular poet of the paraliturgical song, and indeed, a large number of his poems appear in all the collections I mentioned. Inspired by Arabic, Turkish, Persian, and many other foreign songs, Najara purposely simplifies all aspects of the genre and turned the paraliturgical song into a more widespread form of worship. He continues to use mystical themes while combining Jewish ideas formed by the 16th century Kabbalist Yitzhak Luria with Sufi concepts, mainly of the Turkish Baktashi dervishes, aiming to bestow comfort and hope upon the agonized nation. Najara introduces to the paraliturgical practice a new textual and musical device, the pticha, which is an opening vocal improvisation of any paraliturgical song, similar to the layali, which is a vocal introduction to an Arabic song that establishes its musical atmosphere. Najara's poem, Yihiyu Kamots, They Shall Become as Chaff Before the Wind, was inspired by the Turkish song, It Is the Ruby of Your Lips That I'm Asking About. And the poetical form of this song is ghazal, another very important and central poetic style in Arabic poetry. And it was written by the 14th century poet Qazi Burhanuddin. It seems that in this poem, Najara feels compelled to encourage his people to hope for a better future and trust God Almighty. Israel's unique and true God is compared in this poem to the false and powerless gods of the pagan nations. God is attentive to the pain and needs of his believers and thus will redeem them from their miseries and bring salvation. And now let's hear Chabusha sing this song. To give here a passage of introduction, I will skip this. So this is the vocal introduction that I mentioned earlier. Now the song starts. So the fourth and last period is documented chiefly in Baghdad between the 18th and 20th centuries through the work of Chacham Yosef Chaim, so that the last chapter of the history of the liturgical song ends in Baghdad, the city where this artistic and religious journey began. Since the mid-19th century, Jews became influential in Iraq, in both commerce and government. However, from the 1930s onward, the Zionist movement was gained more power, encouraging the settlements of Jews from Europe in Palestine. As a result, conditions of life for the Babylonian Jews deteriorated rapidly, coming to a tragic peak in the Farhud pogrom, the massacre and looting in 1941. The immediate cause of this one and only pogrom in the history of the Babylonian Jews is still a matter of debate and needs to be further investigated. The prevalent opinion among scholars today is that it was provoked by Nazi and Arab-Palestinian anti-Jewish propaganda, which took place during a period of political and governmental instability. Gradually, the Babylonian Jews recovered from this trauma, and life went back to normal, however, not entirely. And after 1945, the situation grew more precarious, resulting in the mass exodus of the Jews in 1950 and 1951. This last period in the history of the paraliturgical song is recorded in Baghdad, in the Babylonian collections, through the work of the rabbi, leader, and poet Chacham Yosef Chaim ben Eliyah al-Chacham. His rabbinic leadership was widely recognized by many Jewish communities, both in and outside of the Middle East. Al-Chacham continues to preserve the poetic legacy of the past, further simplifies the paraliturgical language, and uses mystical ideas combined with tales and saying taken from different Arabic written and oral sources prevalent in the popular culture of his time. His poem, Baruch El Chai, Blessed be our living God, intended for Bar Mitzvah, is a pure imitation of Najara Ziyukamotz, the song that I showed you earlier, which also echoes the yearning and hope for a better future for the nation. We'll skip this example because the melody is just the same. So what can we learn from the Babylonian collections of songs about the, just a second. So what can we learn from the Babylonian collections of songs about the interfaith space of music and poetry? About the music, well, the scant musical information presented in these collections cannot provide an historical account of this aspect of the genre. As I said earlier, it's an oral tradition. However, it is quite clear that the paraliturgical melody is a pure product of its Arabo-Islamic cultural environment. The use of the maqam, namely the musical scale of Arabic music, as well as the singing style of the performers, namely the cantors, and the reaction of the listeners, namely the worshippers, leave no doubt as to the nature of this music, that it is indeed Arabic. About the poems, the text of the paraliturgical song provides a panoramic picture of Jewish life within Arabo-Islamic civilization for two reasons. The first is that its practice is a key form of worship in Middle Eastern Judaism. And the second reason is that this form of worship has a long-lasting tradition among all Arab Jewish communities. Most surprisingly, and as I mentioned earlier, this very ancient and central practice is neither regulated nor standardized by any halachic law. Unlike the liturgy, which is completely regulated by the Shulchan Aruch, a manual of Jewish law written by Rabbi Yosef ben Ephraim Karo in the 16th century, So perhaps this is the reason why the paraliturgical song became a free and open channel which absorbed Arabo-Islamic cultural trend, amalgamated them with Jewish values, and thus created a hybridization of Jewish belief and Arabo-Islamic culture, and a musical and poetic space of Jewish and Islamic interaction and convergence. So about the people of the genre, this hybridization was also characterizes the identity of the poets of the genre. The biographies of many of them attest clearly to their strong Jewish piety, combined with an equally strong immersion in the surrounding Arabo-Islamic culture without any split or feeling of contradiction between the two. On the contrary, it appears that this combination of cultures was both inspiring and enriching. Furthermore, based on interviews I had for the past God only knows how many years with Arab Jews originating in Baghdad, Aleppo, Damascus, Beirut, and Cairo, I concluded that this very mixture of religion and culture is a significant component in their identity, both before and after their immigration to Israel or elsewhere in the West. This group of men in their 80s and 90s, and unfortunately many of them already passed away, expressed their strong sense of belonging to the Arabo-Islamic civilization through the cultural, social, and religious similarities they see between the two faiths. Here is what my father, Morris Haddad, said about Judaism and Islam.
Judaism and Islam are Siamese twins. We complement each other.
Oh, sorry.
Judaism and Islam are Siamese twins. We complement each other. We are both Semitic nations with religions which were evolved on the same piece of land. We both lived in the same area before Islam came about, and even then, we had many similar customs. We have the same mentality, and we cannot ignore each other, as we are in many aspects extremely similar. The greatest cultural figures in both Judaism and Islam created the most significant work in Arabic civilization. They fed each other and contributed to one another many ideas and thoughts. When the Muslims conquered Babylon, the Jews immediately supported them, as they, unlike the Persians, also believed in one God. The Muslims, for the same reason, respected the Jews, and this strong similarity created the ground for the coexistence between them, which lasted for so many centuries.
The view of this precious group of people can perhaps be explained by the fact that the history of Middle Eastern Judaism, from the rise of Islam in the mid-7th century until the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, reveals a unique coexistence between the two faiths and their communities. Although, and this is a very important thing to remember, not one free of all difficulties. During this period, Jews mostly enjoyed autonomous rule, living according to their own faith and leadership. They also shared Arabic culture with the ruling Islamic society, being shaped mainly by Arabic language, poetry, music, and social conduct. It appears that both the monotheistic belief of these two Abrahamic faiths and the strong features of a common culture united differences into a relatively homogeneous society with a safe cohabitation within this religio-cultural space. And now, because we still have time, I want to give you an example of something that happens at the moment in Israel. So I'll share the screen again. Okay, so Abdul Wahab is a very famous composer in the Arab world, and he died in 1991, but he's still 1991, 1992, but he's a very popular and loved composer still. The guy in the left side, Chaim Shaul Abud, was born in Aleppo, Halab, and moved to Jerusalem in the late 1920s. And he was famous for taking Abdul Wahab's melodies and writing Hebrew religious songs. And he became very, very popular. So what we can see is that Chaim Shaul Abud takes a song by Abdul Wahab, Imta Zaman Ismah Ya Gamil, a love song. Here's the text. So it's like Imta Zaman Ismah Ya Gamil wa Ashar Ma'ak ala Shat al-Nil. And the words in English is, when will the time permit me, my beautiful lady, to spend the night with you on the bank of the river Nile. And this very sensual love song turned to be a Hebrew religious song that starts with Eli Bazman Nismach V'Nagil B'Shuv Amach Ir Eitanim. Oh Lord, the time has come to rejoice and delight in your nation's return to its safe land. Now, I want to show you how the similarities between the Arabic and the Hebrew was very, very important. So the Arabic first sentence is Emta Zaman Yismach Ya Gamil, and in Hebrew is Eliba Zeman Nismach V'Nagil. This is a typical technique of all the poets in Hebrew religious poetry who try to imitate the syllables and the sound of the text and the rhyming scheme and everything just to make it possible to sing the same melody. So what I want to show you now is an orchestra that its members are both Jews who immigrated from Baghdad and from Cairo, and were very famous musicians in these cities. They immigrated to Israel in the 1950s, and they started an orchestra, and to this orchestra joined Palestinian Muslims who live in the north parts of Israel. This is the first generation. The second generation is of Israeli-born offspring of Arab Jews who keep this tradition and love this music and actually sing it and perform it. Here we'll hear Moshe Chabusha with this group of people. What I'll do is I'll show you the example and try to explain during the video what we see. Oops. Okay, here it is. So what we can see is a three generation. I'll stop it. The first one on the right side is a nai player, a lute player who came from Baghdad, was very famous there. The one in the middle was born in Israel. He's a composer of Arabic music. And the one in the left side is a Muslim from north parts of Israel. And they are together here. Oh.
אני רוצה להודות
So this is the introductory part. Now, the Arabic version. I'll stop here again because what we see here on the right side, the violin player belongs to a very famous musicians in Cairo. And they were all violin players. I think he's the third or fourth generation of musicians in Cairo. The second guy after him is a Muslim Palestinian from the north of Israel. And the third one on the left side is also a young Palestinian Muslim from the north part of Israel. They're all from the north, most of them. Another interesting thing is that this introductory part, the origin in Arabic, the singer would say, Ya aini ya leli, oh my eyes, oh my nights. And the Jewish singers sometimes will say, Ya aini ya leli, and sometimes will say, Ya eli ya aini, or Ya aini ya eli ya aini, or Ya eli ya leli, which Ya eli is my Lord, and then my eyes, oh my nights. So they will fiddle with the sound of the words and change the Ya'eli, Ya'leli into Ya'eli. And here is what Chabusha is doing, playing with these syllables and words. And the role of this introduction is actually to create this atmosphere of the song. Also an interesting thing here, this space unites Jews and Muslims, old and young, religious and non-religious. All of them unite because they love this music and they like this poetry, whether it is in Arabic or in Hebrew. Oh, I'm so sorry. So now I'll just let you enjoy this performance. I'll start from the song. So let's hear the song itself. It's here. Well, I hope that this beautiful and ancient religious genre, including its history, artists, and the worshippers in the past as well as at present, will inspire those who have lost their faith in a better future for Jewish-Muslim relations in general and for the people of the Middle East in particular. Thank you very much. A very good question. So, at the beginning, the Muwashah was completely secular. And there is two schools that actually fight with one another about the origin of the Muwashah. There is a school that said, well, it was developed in Abbasid Baghdad. It's not in Muslim Spain. Evidence of that, but we know that the muwashakh became very popular in Muslim Spain, and it was a secular form of writing. And it's very interesting. Stern writes about the muwashakh and the attractiveness that the Hebrew religious poets found in this thing. And he says that, for example, Ibn Gabirol and also Yehuda Levi found it very attractive. You wouldn't believe why for, because the melodies for these songs were fantastically attractive. So they wanted to take these melodies, and melody with the text is, they are very, very, very similar. So if you want to take the melody of a certain muwashakh, you have to adopt the muwashakh itself, because otherwise you have problem with the structure of the text. So for example, when Ibn Gabirol adapted this genre, it was completely secular. Now, the Jews of Muslim Spain loved this genre because they start using it as early as the 11th century. So it became a part of their religious worship. When they expelled it and moved to North Africa, that was one of the main religious songs, or the shape of religious songs that they used. And that's why they love it so much. And in fact, they continue to develop this genre even now. I mean, the young generation writes new muwashakhat. It's amazing. And of course, they take old melodies and adopt it to the new muwashakhat. So they keep this long and very ancient tradition very much alive. Very much alive, yes. Until fairly recently, the entire Judeo-Arabic culture was undermined and marginalized. So the entire tradition of the culture, not only the music, everything to do with the culture was celebrated and kept by the communities within their frame of life, not in public. In the early 1980s, a very prominent rabbi became very powerful political. His name is Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And he encouraged the use of Arabic music in religious songs. And from the early 80s, little by little, and now we are a sort of a renaissance of the genre, little by little groups start singing and using this melody and be proud of who they are as Arab Jews, and no longer feel that they are inferior because they have this music. On the contrary, they realize that it's very attractive to people who are not of Arab Jewish origin. And now it's very, very, very popular. But for many years, Judeo-Arabic culture was undermined and marginalized by the Israeli society in a very harsh way. Not only that they saw this culture as primitive, but also the culture of the enemy. So these two very frightening reasons made the Arab Jewish population to feel that ashamed of who they are, and actually, but they couldn't give up on this culture because they love it so much, and it's a beautiful and ancient culture. But when this political situation became so strong, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef became very, very strong in Israeli politics, and also encouraged it not only by words, but also put some money in all sorts of educational projects. This culture, little by little, became more and more prevalent. And the interesting thing is that it wasn't limited to religious people only. It was open for everyone who is interested in that. And that was the attraction. You don't have to be a religious person to celebrate Jewish values or Jewish culture. We don't care if you're religious or not religious. This is our culture, and if you like it and you want to join us, you're most welcome. And that was a very clever move that he made. And today, more and more people from all genres of musical songs love this music and want to take part of it. And only recently we had the central ceremony of the Shbaḥoth in the Western Wall. Now, all this ceremony is based on Arabic melodies. And the one who actually ran this service is Moshe Habusha. And he says that many times when he uses the maqam, the Arabic scale, he thinks about his neighbors, his Muslim neighbors, if they are enjoying his rendition, because it is so good, and indeed it's so good. And many times after this, I mean, today it's a little bit, the situation got very, very sensitive. But for many years after this celebration, they used to call him and said, well, we loved your performance. It was really, really nice. So you can see how music can open the hearts and let people be together and actually celebrate commonalities and try to overcome differences. This is a very interesting question. So after the 1980s and all this wave of revival of the Judeo-Arabic culture, little by little, more people were interested in that. And also the offspring of the Arab Jews who were born in Israel, and until fairly recently, their parents didn't want to tell them anything about their past, all of a sudden remembered who they are, not only Israelis, they come from a very long history of a wonderful culture. So you can hear very important singers and composers who took samples of their grandfathers singing these songs and combined it with their own songs. It is fascinating and beautiful in a sense that their grandfather, for example, there's one very interesting example. His name is Kobi Oz. So he composed pop music, popular and pop music, okay? So it's Western music, completely 100% Western music. But he takes his grandfather's singing and he combines it with his singing. Well, his grandfather's singing is based on Arabic maqam. So, you know, it has a different tonal sound and tonal, and he combined them together in a way, in a magical way. It sounds so coherent and beautiful, and actually gives you the feeling of how ancient the music is and how adaptable it is to every situation. It's wonderful. He is one very good example. There is another example of a guy who is a jazz player, a jazz composer, who took, again, his grandfather's samples of songs that they recorded, you know, at that time there were cassettes, you know, this primitive thing of cassettes. So he took it, made some fantastic restoration for his voice, and again, combined it with his singing today, and it sounds magical. So there is here a combination of new and old, of religious and secular, of Western and Middle Eastern, and altogether it's just fantastic. Again, and I think here the principle which I'm trying to say, and this is a very typical thing in the Arabo-Islamic culture and in the Judeo-Arabic culture, there is a need to emphasize similarities. And with emphasizing similarities, there is a hope that people can live with differences as well. But it was very important for many centuries. And for example, all the people that I interviewed, that was very important for them to emphasize the similarities between Judaism and Islam. Yes, of course, there were problems. Yes, of course, there are some differences, but let's celebrate the similarities. And with this celebration, we can deal with the differences. And unfortunately, today, we don't have this way of thinking or attitude to problems. So I just would like to interest you in our next session on the 3rd of November that will be given by Professor Mark Kligman, who introduced me in this talk. And again, he would talk about another similarity. I was talking about the paraliturgical worship, and Professor Kligman will talk about Judaism and Islam, shared music and prayer. So he will relate to the liturgical aspect of this culture. And I really hope to see you next month. Thank you very much. Thank you.